Have you ever wondered how to get those nice dark and moody edits? Well, this is a style that I personally love and I do quite a lot of. And whilst the overall colors, lights and vibe of the image actually will change from photo to photo, I found that there's a few common traits across all of my presets that I tend to have to help me achieve this style. So whether it's going for a moody forest, a cinematic vibe, night photography, or even summery tropical shots, I found that there are these same things that I always come back to in my editing workflow to achieve a dark and moody style. So let's have a look at some of the key things that make up these types of presets. So the first one we've got is obviously being able to control the light. And if we look at before and after of this one, the original photo here was taken on a really bright day, but we've obviously achieved this kind of dark and moody look after that. Now there's some other aspects gone into this photo which do help achieve it, but first of all is how do we control sort of the light and some of the contrast. And a lot of this comes down to the tone curve. Now you'll see here, this is basically using an S curve here with a few additional points in to really control those highlights and the blacks area of the image. Now you'll also notice that in a lot of this I have the blacks raised down the bottom here as well. So this is really good because if I pull these back down we get quite a contrasted look. So actually being able to raise blacks down here and put additional points into control can bring in that additional light if we need it, or darken it down. A thing I tend to do quite a lot as well in these presets is actually pull the midtones down a bit as well. That helps to overall just darken the image a bit further. So you see if I boost it up there, I start to actually lose the detail, especially in those brighter areas. So pulling this down helps me to control that side too. Now this is coupled with the basic edit panel a little bit further up, where something else I would tend to do is pull the highlights down and pull the shadows quite aggressively up as well, just to, whilst we're darkening down the image, make sure we're not losing any detail there. And then you'll notice as well, I do pull down globally the exposure after I've done those edits. So I don't tend to start with this, I tend to start with the curves tool and then actually approach and just get a final blast from the global exposure there. And that's just because down here you can control the individual aspects a lot better than just overall pulling down the exposure, which might be the first place you want to go to. And just show you that it's not always an S curve, but this one is a little bit more of an aggressive pull down here. If I toggle this on and off, a lot of light has actually been introduced in the image, and then I've used the curves tool to really tame that down. But if I come back up here into the global edit, you'll see that I've not actually increased the exposure at all, but rather I've used this to more play around with bringing in some like extra details and things into the image. And then as a result, I've had to tone this light down quite a lot. So I've used the tone curve here really to pull it down. Whilst we're on this image, this really is a great example of another thing I do a lot in all of my dark and moody edits. And this is going beyond the presets, and this is looking at masking. Now I do a hell of a lot of masking when it comes to achieving this style. And that's mostly because you want to paint light further into the image. You want to enhance your subject more, do everything you can to create the mood of that piece. And masking is really where you can create the mood of the piece. And if we look side by side with these two, it is just a full green shot of a forest with a road running through. Here we've been able to use some masking edits to bring in some temperature changes to really show some orange. We've been able to bring in a bit more atmosphere up top where the light would be coming in and equally darken this down, and also look at darkening down any further areas. So I'm more just enhancing what's in my scene with the masking, but by doing this we're creating a lot more depth. We're actually creating an atmosphere and a mood to our piece. So if we come over to the side and we toggle this on and off and turn my full masking off, this now looks like what would happen if we just put a preset over, and you can see the massive difference and the amount of masks that I've used here. Most of these are just either radial, linear and brushes, so nothing too advanced going on. It's just by stacking them on top of each other, we're able to create a really nice atmosphere to this photo edit. So masks is a massive point about it, and it's the thing that can really take your edits to the next level and should be done beyond just throwing a preset over any photo. Also, if you want to see the full breakdown of this and how to basically create these moody edits, head on over to my website and you'll be able to see the masterclass there. Or if you just want to get some of these presets for yourself, head on over there. There's a couple of free packs up there as well, and you can grab all of my moody presets. Links for those will just be down in the description below. Now I'm not going to touch upon color too much here. Whilst color does make up a big part of the moody style, it's also different from photo to photo. So having what colors we might do in a cinematic like street photography side versus what we would do in a forest shot like this are going to be different, because the color palette is different in each of those scenarios. videos. But a final touch I tend to put on all of my dark and moody photos, and again, this is really to help create the mood and the atmosphere that we want within the edit itself that may not be present when we took the photo, is to use some color grading. Now, color grading for me comes at the end of my workflow, and it's kind of like just putting a filter over the top of your image. By that, I mean you can introduce additional colors into your image, either in the shadows, highlights, midtones, or just globally as well. And the color grading can be really powerful for just putting that kind of last feel onto your image that you just can't quite achieve with like HSL sliders or the calibration, or even the curves. So again, on this image here, very, very subtle, but if I turn the color gradient on and off, it kind of pushes us more towards this burnt orange feeling of a forest that we've got there. And I wanted to create a little bit more of a cooler vibe with this. So as I turn this back on, you can see just some greens take over a little bit more. Now this is very, very subtle color grading in that it is literally just a saturation of 6 into the shadows, introducing a little bit more blue there. Obviously you can go sort of as far as you want with this. You can bring in some additional ones over the top. And when I'm playing around with color grading in dark and moody, I either tend to follow a complementary color palette, which is having one color on one side of the color wheel and one on the other. And this is usually balanced between my shadows and my highlights. Or I tend to pick one segment of the color wheel and introduce a different segment of that across the shadows, highlights, and sometimes even the midtones as well. This can give some really cool effects into your image and can sometimes be just the last thing you were missing in your edit that achieves that look that was in your head. So I know I used this photo, for example, in one of my previous videos, but again, it's another good example of if I take away the color grading here, we get this kind of wash over the image that I do not like at all. And the color grading really just gives us this blue sort of vibe over it. And I've gone for a complementary palette here, which is having sort of blues in the highlights here. Just pull that up and down, and actually having in the shadows some yellows as well. So we're taking basically the opposite sides of the color wheel, and you can have more in one and less in another. So I'm really heading more towards the cool vibe here because I wanted a moody, cool, like black tone going on. So I'm going to have less of a saturation in the shadows with those sort of oranges being produced. I'm going to have more of saturation in the highlights with the blue. Why have I chosen to go more here? Well, that's because there's a lot more highlight, brighter parts going on in the image that I want to bring out. So like this sky, for example. And if it's too bright, then we can use this slider down here to, if we pull over to the side here, you're kind of see less of that and a little bit more brightness in there. But if we come the other side, we'll see that sky go fully blue. Now again, if you want to understand what's going on in this, I do have a video on the channel about color grading, or again, you can head over to the masterclass and you can learn for yourself there about what's actually happening when you're pulling these sliders up and down. Out of these 3 tips today, color grading is definitely the one I think is the hardest to kind of understand because there's so many possibilities here. But if you stick down to picking a color palette to work with, as in, are you going to do complementary? Are you going to pull from different segments? Are you going to bring in 3 colors as well? Sticking to this is actually going to help you then go back through your edit and maybe you take away some colors that, again, in your image that might be a bit distracting for the composition, and remove those as well. These are 3 things that I tend to do across all of my dark and moody edits, and they are going to be slightly different each time, but I've just found this is a common theme that I do to again help control some of the colors going on here, help control the light in the image as well, but also how to create that mood, how to capture that mood that you're actually going for. This is dark and moody, but what is the mood? What's the atmosphere you're trying to create? Going in with that answer in your head will help you make these better decisions when you're doing your editing. Again, I hope that's helped you with a few ideas with this. If you've got any questions, anything, put it in the comments below. Let me know what kind of dark and moody edits you actually take the most. Is it street photography? Is it nature? Is it photography? Do you shoot at night a lot? What's your style that you like to shoot the most? For me, it's definitely nature, and it's out in the countryside as opposed to being in the city. I just much prefer landscape stuff a lot more. Anyway, thank you for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.